Hello, hello. Welcome, Aldsidu, Old Ways Heathens of the Saxon, Germanic, Scandinavian varieties. Here we discuss historical heathenry of the Germanic tribes who venerated the Aesir, spoke Germanic languages, venerated Germanic gods and goddesses, and celebrated Germanic holy days. Today's video is how to do a historical bloat. Now, the Germanic tribes lived in this area right here, which included Scandinavia, Frisia, parts of Belgium, and a large section of Germany, most of Germany. The Germanic tribes here spoke Germanic languages, and yes, the Nordic languages are Germanic languages. They venerated the Aesir. The rest of Europe had their own various paganisms, their own various gods and goddesses, their own various holidays. They were not considered the same peoples as the Germanic tribes. The Romans even used different words for them. They called them Keltoi, for example, for the Celts, or the Germani for the Germanics. So there were different names for these tribes. They were different peoples with very different cultures. So to do a historical Germanic bloat to the Aesir, these are the items that are needed. Now, a herg is a heathen altar that was historically made of stones. For example, in the Hervarar saga, the daughter of King Alfr of Alfheim reddened the hergers, which is stone altars, with bloats. So you need a herg, a stone altar. You need a bloat bowl, which will catch the blood of the animal that's slaughtered. You need a laut tine, which is a twig taken from a tree if you'd like, or you can purchase a utensil that will also sprinkle the blood on the Weofathanes, which are the statues of the gods, on the people, and also you would pour the blood on the stone altar. We'll get to that. You also need materials for fire, so you need a lighter if you use modern methods, or flint and steel, or some other method for starting a fire ready. I personally use wood chips and a metal censer, but other people tend to use candles or incense or a torch. But historically, heathen ritual began with the creation of sacred space, which often was done with fire. You, of course, need the animal, or you need blood, or a substitute. So if you do not slaughter your own food, you can get blood from a butcher, which is what I prefer to do. Other people use a substitute for blood, like an alcoholic beverage. But the word bloat does mean blood, so I encourage getting blood if at all possible. And while my wife grew up on a farm, most of us did not. My wife owns farmland as well. I have taken part in 2 live bloats myself, but I am not one that knows how or was taught how to slaughter animals. So obviously you need someone well trained. And most heathens today get blood from a butcher, or they use an alcoholic beverage as a substitute. Now, I spoke before about altars. The word is herger in the Norse languages, or herg in Old English. And I already mentioned one of these 3 passages, but the Poetic Edda has a passage where he made an altar of heaped up stones. The gathered rocks have grown all bloody, and he reddened them again with fresh blood of cows. And a second passage from the Hervarar saga: a horse was then brought into the assembly and hewn in pieces and cut up for eating, and the sacred tree was smeared with blood. So in Uppsala, they did have a sacred tree. This passage took place in Uppsala. Yggdrasil was what the tree represented. For Aldsidu, Old Saxon heathens, the Irminsul was very similar. The Irminsul too was probably reddened with blood, just as the sacred tree in Uppsala was reddened with blood. So again, a bloat is the word that means blood. Now, my favorite historical passage describing a bloat is Håkon the Good Saga 16. And actually, this passage is describing a Yule bloat in Sumbul, which would have taken place in a full moon in January. Sometimes it could be a full moon in the very early part of February. But the saga states it was an old custom, which in Old Saxon that word is Aldsidu. In Scandinavian languages that word is Forn Sed. So it was an old custom that when there was to be a bloat, all the people would come to the spot where the temple stood and bring with them all that they required while the feast of the bloat lasted. To this feast all the men brought ale with them. All kinds of cattle as well as horses were slaughtered, and all the blood that came from them was called lout. And the vessels in which the blood was collected were called lout vats, or bloat bowls. And lout staves, or lout tines, were made like sprinkling brushes, which the whole of the altars and the temple walls, both outside and inside, were sprinkled over. And also the people were sprinkled with blood, but the flesh was boiled into a savory meat for those present. Now today, many people claim they do the old ways, but most of the time the old ways are ignored. People don't study, they make a lot of assumptions, they claim that they do the old ways, when really they're just venerating the old gods and new ways. And a lot of people say, we don't do this anymore, we're not going to do it. Well, that's fine. Don't say you do the old ways then, because a bloat and symbol are the two most attested rituals in historical passages. And these were important for venerating the gods. These were central to venerate the Aesir historically. And not everyone is cut out to do old gods' old ways, so that's why Aldsidu exists, and historical heathen groups have existed. They've divorced themselves from the majority of people who follow Aesir because they want to do the old ways. So I do understand that sometimes you have to use alcohol in place of blood, and I understand that, and that's fine. But the old ways would still follow these procedures for honoring the gods. Now, some people say I want to do a bloat indoors, but historically, if you were to slaughter a pig or a horse or a cow and you were to drain its blood, you're going to have many bloat bowls full of blood, and you're going to be sprinkling them on the inside of your house, the outside of your house, etc. Just like the wine hall, the mead halls were sprinkled on the outside and inside, because there is spiritual aspects to it, and the temples were sprinkled outside and inside, and people were sprinkled outside and inside. And that's why a lot of people today, they don't want to be sprinkled with blood. They're worried about it staining their clothes or whatever. But in historical times, people got dirty. They worked in the fields, they got dirty. With our modern hygiene, we are a little different. But the Norse people were some of the cleanest people on the planet. I don't think that they would replace a linen or wool garment after being splattered with a little bit of blood. This is an altar that we did. We used it for an outdoor wedding because historically ritual was done in sacred groves. So we were outside in a forested area with lots of water and a nice opening. And you can see if you have something like this, similar inside your house. And I'm not against home altars, but historically, bloat was done outside. But if you have to do something inside because you own an apartment, there's no parks or any places where you can use alcohol or blood to leave an offering and create a stone altar, you can do something like this. Now I'm going to share about the Saxon Irminsul because I have a giant is a strong term. I have a 9-foot tall Irminsul in my backyard. The Saxons had a holy site called Irminsul. So the Annals Pentivani said around 775 AD that Charlemagne conquered the Eresburg and found the place which is called Irminsul, and he set these places on fire. Rudolf of Fulda, who wrote around 855 AD about the Saxons, he said the Saxons also worshipped in the open air a vertically upright trunk of no small size. They called it in their mother tongue Irminsul, or in Latin the universal column, because in a sense it carries everything. And I already mentioned the Hervarar saga Hydrix, that there was a tree in Uppsala that was smeared with blood. I have absolutely no doubt that the Irminsul was sprinkled with blood the same way. So this is my backyard where you can see I have my Irminsul, I have a stone altar next to it. I also have, it looks like a mini bench, but sometimes I bring my Weophods, which is statues of the gods outside. I can put my censer down with fire there when I'm done creating sacred space, and I can redden my statues of the gods, the Weos, and I can redden the Irminsul as well as the stone altar. Now, bloat order. The first part is the people all gather together. So I'm going to kind of walk you through a historical bloat now. The people will gather together. They will light a fire, the priests, and they will walk around in a circle around the stone altar and make the place holy. And they will recite Beda, which is the word for prayer. A lot of people pronounce it bead, but the name is pronounced Beda. It's a prayer to the gods, goddesses, or ancestors. Then they would bring the animal forward. They would slice the neck area where the artery is. They will cause as little pain as possible on the animal. They will drain its blood. They will pour a bunch of the blood as they recite prayers on the hair. They will then sprinkle the people with blood and say prayers as they were sprinkling the people. And they will then say another closing prayer, our bead, our beta. They then would walk to the wine hall while the animal was taken to the hall to be cooked. They would go to the wine hall and sprinkle it with blood and inside and out. And they might even, as well, if they had a temple, sprinkle the blood on the walls inside and outside of the temple and any statues of the gods inside. They then would eat a meal because their ancestors were smart. They ate before they drank. And if you don't mind me saying, you know, when you read the Eddas, you read the sagas, you read some of the earliest, like the Heliand and some of the other early poems or historical sources, they seem to imply that the entire animal was eaten. I mean, often the head of the animal was put on a spear in the ground facing north, but otherwise the rest of the animal was eaten. Later sources, especially the Christian sources, kind of ripping on the heathens, like Adam of Bremen, for example, would imply that they wasted the animal, like they hung it on a tree. And I'm not really sure. A lot of people doubt Adam of Bremen's testimony. There was a 9-year sacrifice for sure. But what's very strange when you read a lot of the early literature and you read the law codes like the Saxon Capitularies and the Lex Saxonum, for example, if we're just to talk about the Saxons, the law codes forced upon the Saxons always forbid them from doing their holy days, venerating in sacred groves, forced them to go to church, forbid them from burning the dead, forbid them from, after war, sacrificing prisoners to the gods. Um, but it never forbid bloat. And I'm assuming it's because they saw it outside of throwing the blood on an altar, they saw it as just eating food. And it really appears to me as time went on, the Christians became more anti heathen, not that they were never anti heathen, but um, really a lot of the passages imply, like Haakon the Good 16, that the entire animal was eaten and none of it's left for the gods, that the blood is for the gods and the animal is to be eaten by the people. And that's what I believe. But later sources like Adam of Bremen claim that, you know, they um, left animals out hanging on trees or sitting on an altar or whatever. Um, but I really lean to eating the entire animal, and the blood is the offering. And after the meal was eaten, they did sumbul, because once your stomach is full, then you can bring in the alcohol. And if you want to know how to do sumbul, go see my blog at www.aldsidu.com/blog. Scroll down to see my article on how sumbul was done historically. You can also see a more detailed written article of this. It's called How to Do a Solitary Ritual, where I discuss a historical bloat. Now, pre-bloat, You would make sure your hair gets set up. You have your fire method and all your fire utensils ready. You have either the animal or the blood from the butcher or your cider, wine, or ale as a blood substitute with the bloat bowl and lout tine. You would have your whale-fod statues if you wanted your whales. And, I have my altar and Irminsul in my backyard kind of just permanently out there. So you need to have those things ready beforehand. Now, the first part of a bloat, they created sacred space. Now, I have three passages here. The Erbigja saga. Thereafter, Thorwald fared with fire through his land out from Staff River in the west and east to that river which is now called Thor's River, and settled his shipmates there. Landnamabuk. There he called it Svertingstodum. Here they built a temple. That land, Jorundur, carried fire around, where he later laid his temple. So when you claim land historically or you make a place holy, you carry fire around it. And the Old Saxon Hellion, chapter 2 or Fit 2 of the Old Saxon Hellion shows a ritual. And the ritual began, taken from Fit 2, a wise old man then brought holy smoke from the Alaha, and walking around the altar with his censer, he served, powerfully carrying out his veneration. So what's an Alaha? Well, a lot of times people translate it as temple, but it really means elevated, a place of elevated running water. So aha is your word for water, and al is like a pond or up or upper. And I honestly think it was an outdoor sacred grove. It is, this word is relatively rare in the Hellion, but it does occur a couple times. The word with for sacred grove, UUIH, which the word Christmas in modern German comes from, Weihnacht. And Dr. Jackson Crawford does a video on the Norse Bay. That is the equivalent of a sacred grove to the Saxons. With is a bay to the Scandinavians. So in sacred groves, they would build their altars and they would walk around it with fire, creating sacred space. Now, as they walked around with fire, I have no doubt that they probably said prayers. Beda is a prayer. There is an English historian with the name, they call him Bede, but his name is Beda. And lots of people just say Bede today, but it's really pronounced Beda. And I have no doubt that after they created sacred space, they said lots of prayers to the gods and goddesses during a historical bloat. And then, of course, as I explained, they cut the artery, causing the animal as little pain as possible. They drain the blood, and they will then dip the lout time in the blood and say blessings like Aldsidu Thunar and the names of other gods. Thunar is the Old Saxon word for Thor. So they would sprinkle all the people there. And, sometimes I bring my statues of my gods outside and I sprinkle them as well. They then will pour many bloat bowls out on the stone altar. The people will then walk to the temple and to the wine hall. Of course, the animal's taken away and the cooks start cooking it to prepare the feast. And while that's going on, they're sprinkling the inside and outside of the hall because, by sprinkling the inside and outside of the wine hall and the temple with blood, they're setting it aside to the gods, in a sense, creating it holy. Now, they eat first, as I said earlier, and then they do symbol. And, this was a time of merriment. And as I said before, after the bloat, they eat before they drink. And I'm sure they did some drinking as they ate. I even saw today on a Facebook group, for example, heathens complaining that the meat always disappears first. That is certainly true. I would strongly suggest for those of you that do ritual with your families or local community that you do not allow drinking until the feast has begun. If not, wait altogether till after the feast and symbol has started the drinking rituals. Now that is a historical bloat, and hopefully you've learned a lot from listening to this video. And this is a picture of a pig that was slaughtered in Missouri. I used to go to Missouri to hang out with some who were farmers that did know how to slaughter their own food, and that pig was absolutely delicious, by the way. Come visit our website, www.aldsidu.com, and then //blog. Please hit like and subscribe, and hope to see you for more videos as we discuss the historical old ways. Thank you.